G'day and welcome to Inside Rugby. My name is Mark, and if you haven't been here before, I'm a Kiwi rugby fan that's living here in beautiful Cancun in Mexico, and it's a glorious day again today, folks. We're coming into my favorite time of the year. It's absolutely beautiful, but you didn't come here for me to talk about the weather in Mexico, so let's talk some rugby. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about the American League and in particular some bad news that came out this week for global rugby. Hello everyone and welcome back. If you're here for the first time, welcome. It's great to have you on board, and if you're a long-time viewer of my channel, thank you. Appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And as I said, we're moving ahead with rugby content on this channel. Now, when I've been starting to think about the kind of content I want to make for you on this channel, I've been thinking about two things. I want to focus on, of course, the games and things that we're seeing around the world that are important to us all, but I also want to talk about the health of global rugby, because without that being focused on, talked about, discussed, pressure put on those that are in charge, we're not going to have a game as we know it. And I want to be quite clear and black and white about that. There's too much pressure in the world economy at the moment. There's too much pressure on sponsors within world sport, and the sport of rugby needs to get its act together and start making change. So I want to talk about those major issues here on this channel. I'm going to be commencing a round of interviews soon with a number of people, stakeholders for within the world of rugby, right from junior level rugby players right up to senior officials in the game and administrators. And I want us all to keep a focus on this beautiful game that we all love, to make sure it's around for generations to come. So in today's video, I thought I'd talk about the demise of the Toronto Arrows in the Major League Rugby competition in the United States. This news has come out this week. It's sad for rugby, not just in America and Canada, but for me, it's sad for rugby across the world. Now, I've made a couple of videos about the subject of the health of global rugby so far, and I'm going to keep banging on about it because I'm very, very passionate about our great game. And one of the sad things that I think is happening in the world of rugby is the actual business model of the game. And just let me talk about that for a moment, because it's also very applicable to what's happened with the Toronto Arrows in Canada and why they haven't been able to be part of the, or won't be part of the competition in the Major League Rugby competition in America in 2024. And the reason is because their major investor was an elderly gentleman who loved the game of rugby and wanted to invest in it, and he's been propping up that team for a number of years. Now, this is not an isolated incident. When I was in the UK and Wales earlier this year, I visited a lot of clubs to see what was going on in those clubs and educating myself about the sport of rugby in that particular part of the world. And I found the same thing there as well. There's a lot of these clubs who have got very, very wealthy investors involved who've been committing money to the clubs for a long, long time. And unfortunately, when these people pass away, there doesn't seem to be a plan B in these clubs and the way they're being administered. And this is exactly what happened in the case of the Toronto Arrows. There was not a plan B already in place for this team to be able to survive. And when this gentleman sadly passed away earlier this year, there wasn't an opportunity for the Toronto Arrows to go to their plan B and make sure they stick in their MLR for 2024. And this is something that needs to be addressed, and it's something that I keep talking about in my videos. The business model of rugby around the world today is wrong, and it needs some business people to come in and really clean up what's going on. Now, for business people to come into the sport of rugby and actually want a career in the sport's got to make it attractive. Again, I go back to my experience in the UK earlier this year when I visited a lot of clubs. A lot of the clubs are run by volunteers, people that have been in the game for 40 or 50 years, who are absolutely wonderful people, diehards of the community, given their life, blood, sweat and tears to the game of rugby. But they may not be the smartest business people in the world, and they've been relying on their amount of knowledge that they have to keep the rugby clubs afloat for as long as they have. And let's face it, they've done a great job in a lot of instances. But we are moving into a different economical cycle. We're also moving into a different marketing and communication cycle around the world today, not only in sport, but in life in general. And of course, this is being created by social media and a lot of the other ways that we impact. So teams like the Toronto Arrows, they needed to have plans in place which were going to attract sponsors, attract fans, and attract players to their clubs so that they could actually be sustainable over the future, and they just simply didn't do that. So what was really disappointing for me was to read the statement that came out from Major League Rugby talking about, we've been working on trying to find a solution to keep the Toronto Arrows alive and to keep them in the competition for next year, but unfortunately we weren't able to come up with a solution. Well, this is something that should have been worked on a long time ago by the Major League Rugby. They should have had opportunities opening up for sponsors to come in and investors to come into the game. And this is just, for me, it's just incompetence, really. That's what it comes down to. And we see this at World Rugby level as well, and I'm getting a little bit too passionate about this because I care about the game so much. And I want to see the game prosper, and I know that it can because I'm an ex-business corporate guy, and I used to run global businesses, and I know what it's like to actually make a difference on a global stage. And a lot of people that are involved in World Rugby, they have had no experience in running a global business before, let alone a global sports business in a very difficult economic situation. So I'm not pointing fingers at any particular individual in this case. I'm talking about the health of the game and making sure that the game's going to survive for the next generations, and bringing the game back to what we see it and what we want it to be. I think that's really, really critical. And then the impact on those players who played for the Toronto Arrows, you know, they're going to be distraught mentally now. Their families are going to be upset. There's going to be a lot of stresses within the family, but they're just now forgotten. There was in the newspapers for a day and everybody moves on, but we've got all these rugby players around the world and coaches and people connected to these clubs that are going out of business, and they're just being left to it. There's no support for them. And if you haven't watched my interview with Scott Van Breda on this show, check it out, because Scott talks about this and what happened to him in Jersey when the Jersey Reds went out of business earlier this year. And this is something else that needs to be looked at, because the sustainability for rugby clubs goes beyond the club just putting out a team every weekend and playing great rugby. It's got to look at how these players can transition into life after the rugby club. Now, I've got someone coming on my show next week from Major League Rugby, so it's going to be really interesting to have them have a chat with me about that topic. So if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a bit of a thumbs up as well. I'm trying to make a difference in the world of rugby, and I'm trying to educate myself, and I'm trying to share that information with all of you so we know what's really going on, and we're just not making speculative comments that are not factual. So I want to get Major League Rugby on here. I want to talk about what's going on in the American leagues, and I want to talk about what needs to be done, because it's all very well having a whinge and a bitch and a moan like a lot of us do, but I'm someone that also wants to come with solutions. We need to make rugby better. So how are we going to do it? What do we need to put in place? And these are some of the questions I want to ask to Major League Rugby, and I want to ask to World Rugby as well, and find out what answers they're going to give us. So if you're watching this video today and you're a rugby fan from somewhere around the world other than the United States, do you know much about the American League? Have you watched any of the games at all? Do you know even where to go to get access to those games? And do you know some of the players that are playing in the United States these days? Do you know that Ma Nonu plays for the San Diego Legions and has been there since he retired from the All Blacks? So there's a lot of good stuff going on in American rugby, and we need to do more to understand how it can go further. And it's a real shame that the Toronto Arrows didn't survive in that league, because the Canadian teams were really the instigators and the early adopters for that MLR in America. And if it wasn't for the Canadian teams, then there probably wouldn't have been a league right from the very beginning. So now that there's no teams from Canada in the MLR for 2024, we need to see what's happening within Canada Rugby and to see what they can do to get themselves back into the MLR. But the big question is, where's the investment coming from? Who's managing the purse strings? And what are they doing from a marketing and communications point of view to turn it around in the MLR? And we've got to look at this as a global rugby family, because we can say, oh well, rugby's strong in South Africa and it's strong in New Zealand, and we know Australia's got problems, but unless we look at this as a global rugby family and start to put solutions together that's going to help everybody, then we're not truly a global rugby family, are we? That's something we need to put our hand on our heart and be honest about. So I want to see what changes can be made, what betterment can we come up with for the game of rugby, not only in the United States, but across the world. And that's a crusade that I'm starting here right on my channel. So I'd like you to come along for the ride and give me your views and perspectives on it as well. If you know anything more that's going on in the MLR in America, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you've got an opinion that you want to share as well, put it out there. I'd love to read it on my channel. Okay, that's it for this short video. I wanted to talk about the unfortunate demise of the Toronto Arrows in the MLR, the American League of Rugby. Now, as I said, I've lined up a number of really interesting interviews that I'm in the process of conducting. You're going to see those here on my channel very soon. So make sure you stick around, because there's going to be some really interesting deep dives into these conversations and really talking about the root causes of some of these issues in world rugby today. So if that's something that's also going to interest you on my channel, then I'd love to have your attendance right here. Okay, I'll be back again soon with another video right here on Inside Rugby with Mark. Until then, stay safe, stay well everybody, and I'll see you again really soon. Until then, it's time to say adios from Cancun. Bye for now.